How many of you at one point in your lives were students? Anybody? Some of you didn't raise your hands. Now I'm worried. Particularly worried about a few of you. We were all students at one point, right? As we learned, as we gained new knowledge, I want you to think back to math class with me for a moment this morning. And Jim is probably going to rake me over the coals being a math teacher. Why, when you were in, I don't know, let's say 3rd or 4th grade, why weren't you taught algebra at that time? Why didn't your teachers just jump automatically to algebra when you were in 3rd grade? Well, the answer is sort of obvious, right? You need to know how to add, how to subtract, how to multiply and divide. In other words, there are prerequisites for doing higher levels of math, right? We get that, we know that. And the truth is, there are prerequisites for all kinds of things that we do in life, right? There are certain things that we have to get to, certain places that we have to reach, certain things that we have to do before we can move on. Before you go surfing, you better know how to swim, right? Just in case you get knocked off that one time. There are prerequisites in life for all kinds of things. I would contend that up to this point in Mark's Gospel, for the first really 8.5 chapters, the disciples have been in their prerequisites. They've been building the necessary knowledge. They've been going through the necessary motions. They've been watching Jesus do the necessary things that they have to do so that they can finally do algebra. At least spiritually speaking. Because it's in the story today that we're about to read. It's in this story that Jesus begins to tell them something new. Not because they were mentally incapable before, right? It's not that they all of a sudden were just in this enlightened state that they could finally receive what Jesus is telling them. But what happened is they were finally ready because of the confession that's made by Peter in this story. We're going to come to that momentarily. The story today, to me, is a reminder, a beautiful reminder, yet also how far we have to go. We often think ourselves very intelligent and enlightened, right? We get on social media, we get on Facebook, and we see somebody post something really dumb. And we think, wow, I'm so much smarter than they are. Or we hear somebody in the grocery store say something ridiculous. I'm so much smarter. We think ourselves very intelligent and enlightened. The truth is, each and every one of us has so far to go. God has a lot more to teach us. Maybe starting with humility a bit. God has a lot more to teach us. So as we read this morning, I want you to read it with those ears. The disciples had seen and done so much to this point. It would have been easy for them to have assumed, we've learned everything there is to learn about this Messiah figure. When in fact they were still very far from the truth of who he was. So let's read in Mark chapter 8, chapters 8 and 9, rather, beginning in verse 22. I'm going to move this down a little bit because I feel like I'm reverberating quite a bit. It sounds better to me. Can everybody still hear me all right? Okay, good. It's got to be somebody else's child. I'm saying. Can't be mine. Mine would never do anything like that. It's a good thing I have a loving wife to get up and go take care of those situations. All right, verse 22, Mark chapter 8. The word of the Lord in the Gospel of Mark. When they arrived at Bethsaida, some people brought a blind man to Jesus, and they begged him to touch the man and heal him. Jesus took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. Then, spitting on the man's eyes, he laid his hands on him and asked, "Can you see anything now?" The man looked around. "Yes," he said, "I see people, but I can't see them very clearly. They look like trees walking around." Then Jesus placed his hands on the man's eyes again, and his eyes were opened. His sight was completely restored, and he could see everything clearly. Jesus sent him away, saying, "Don't go back into the village on your way home." Jesus and his disciples left Galilee and went up to the villages near Caesarea Philippi. As they were walking along, he asked them, "Who do people say that I am?" "Well," they replied, "some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, and others say you are one of the other prophets." Then he asked them, "But who do you say I am?" Peter replied, "You are the Messiah." Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him. Then Jesus began to tell them that the Son of Man must suffer many terrible things and be rejected by the elders, the leading priests, and the teachers of religious law. He would be killed, but 3 days later he would rise from the dead. As he talked about this openly with his disciples, Peter took him aside and began to reprimand him for saying such things. "Oh, Peter." Jesus turned around and looked at his disciples and reprimanded Peter. "Get away from me, Satan," he said. "You are seeing things merely from a human point of view, not from God's." Then, calling the crowd to join his disciples, he said, "If anyone wants to be my follower, you must turn from your selfish ways, take up your cross, and follow me. If you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake and for the sake of the good news, you will save it. But what do you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your own soul? Is anything worth more than your soul? If anyone is ashamed of me and my message in these adulterous and sinful days, the Son of Man will be ashamed of that person when he returns in the glory of his Father with the holy angels." Jesus went on to say, "I tell you the truth. Some standing here right now will not die before they see the kingdom of God arrive in great power." 6 days later, Jesus took Peter, James, and John and led them up a high mountain to be alone. As the men watched, Jesus' appearance was transformed, and his clothes became dazzling white, far whiter than any earthly bleach could ever make them. Then Elijah and Moses appeared and began talking with Jesus. Peter exclaimed, "Rabbi, it's wonderful for us to be here. Let's make 3 shelters as memorials, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He said this because he didn't really know what else to say. They were all terrified. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my dearly loved Son. Listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, Moses and Elijah were gone, and they saw only Jesus with them. As they went back down the mountain, he told them not to tell anyone what they had seen until the Son of Man had been risen from the dead. So they kept it to themselves, but they often asked each other what he meant by rising from the dead. Then they asked him, "Why do the teachers of religious law insist that Elijah must return before the Messiah comes?" Jesus responded, "Elijah is indeed coming first to get everything ready. Yet why do the scriptures say that the Son of Man must suffer greatly and be treated with utter contempt? But I tell you, Elijah has already come, and they chose to abuse him just as the scriptures predicted." There's a lot packed into what we just read, okay? There's no way we're going to be able to do all of it justice. But I have some things that I want to talk about because this moment, Mark's whole gospel pivots in this moment, right? This is a huge turning point in Mark's gospel. Because this is the moment that the Messiah is revealed, at least fully to this point, because there's more to come. But this is when the disciples sort of begin to understand and at least get it a little bit. Because first, we have to talk about the fact that Peter declares Jesus is Messiah. Mark has put the story of the blind man receiving sight, needing to be healed twice, which is interesting in and of itself. And we don't really have time to go into that particular point. But he puts the story of this blind man receiving sight and the disciples receiving insight right next to each other, precisely to highlight the sort of transformation that I think the disciples are undergoing in this moment. The blind man sees people around him, but what does he see them as? Not really as people, although he sort of knows that they're people. that he sees them as trees walking and wandering around. So he sees, but not fully yet. The crowds, and presumably the disciples in this moment with them, they see Jesus, but they don't fully see him. They envision him as a great prophet, right? He's somebody to be or to admire, right? He's somebody to inspire people around him, but not really quite sure who he is yet. See, I think these two stories are put right next to each other on purpose. And I think sometimes we get ahead of ourselves and imagine that Paul is making some great Trinitarian statement here. Let's go back to the Trinity here for a moment. That declaring that Jesus is the Messiah, he's proclaiming him the Son of God, the second person of the Trinity. That's not really what's happening in this moment. I think instead what Peter is doing is drawing on the language of Messiah as king. Well, what is a king? A king is somebody who comes in and takes control. Right? A king is somebody who builds an army. A king is somebody who comes in with power and might and overthrows the people around them. You see, Peter understands that Jesus is Messiah, but maybe not quite the way that the Messiah is truly supposed to be. But he does see Jesus as the promised king, the descendant of David. And so all other would-be kings in this area at this time, Herod, who is proclaiming himself king of the Jews, they're false, they're usurpers. They don't belong on that throne. They don't belong, that title doesn't belong to them. So instead, what we see, as Peter misunderstands Messiah, I think, is that Jesus actually gives the idea of the Messiah a complete facelift. He changes it. They finally grasp, at least in part, the sort of kingdom that Jesus was beginning to initiate around them. Not the one that they expected, but the one that Jesus brought. Because again, Jesus isn't building an army to kick out the Romans. Not once has he made a statement that Rome is his enemy. He wasn't even setting up a new religious order in this moment to topple the high priests and religious scribes. That's not what he's doing. So what was he doing? Well, what have we seen Mark say about Jesus for the last 8 chapters? He's healing people, right? He goes from town to town, from place to place, every moment tending to the needs of those around him. He gets down in the muck and the messiness of life with people. He makes friends, but not the sort of friends that you and I want. He makes friends with outcasts. He makes friends with sinners and prostitutes and tax collectors and all the sorts of people that you and I think, I want to hang out with them. He's doing the very things that he knows are necessary for the true king to do, for the Messiah to do. But everybody's still missing it. It's as though trees are walking around, not seeing the people, not seeing Jesus for who he really is. For Jesus, being Messiah isn't merely ceremonial. It wasn't about being a great representative of the people or some kind of figurehead that they could point to and say, there's our guy. That's our Messiah. So much more than that. It was about actually knowing people, getting to know them, to teach them, to show them the best way to live. So who do we say Jesus is? Was he a great teacher? Yeah. Is he more than that to you? Is he Superman? Is he some kind of superhero coming into the scene, smashing all of his enemies and kicking them out? Doesn't really look like that, does he? I think sometimes we envision him that way, though. That he's going to swoop in and punch our enemies and knock them out so that they no longer bother us. So, if he's not that, if he's something different, who is he? Who do we say that he is? And then do we go and follow and live the same way that he did? What are ways in which Jesus lived and engaged his culture that we can take on and to live and engage and challenge our own culture. Because if you don't think there are ways in which our culture are counter to the ways that Jesus lived, I recommend you take another look. There are definitely ways in which our culture does not reflect the will of Jesus. So if Jesus is Messiah for us, if he's King for us, and we want to live like him, then that means in some sense we're going to have to be countercultural. Are we living that way? Just a little side note here. Caesarea Philippi, you probably picked up on that place being read. You may not know the importance of Caesarea Philippi, but that was a place where Herod the Great, yes, one of the kings of the Jews, he had set up this great temple to Caesar Augustus. A temple honoring Caesar Augustus, not a temple for God, but a temple to honor Caesar Augustus as a god. This is the place where Peter makes the confession. Jesus, you are the Messiah. It's not just a religious, theological statement that Peter is making. It's a political one as well. It's one that could get him killed. If a Roman citizen overheard him and said, I'm going to go to the local garrison, turn this person in for blasphemy against Caesar. We talk a lot about being persecuted in our country as Christians. So when the time comes that you can confess Jesus as Messiah to those around you, are you shying away from him? Jesus talks about that in this moment, in the story, that those who fail to confess him, people fail to confess before the Father. But if we stand for Jesus, if we are bold and proud of the fact that our faith is in him, he will be bold and proud of us before the Father. The second thing I want to talk about here is about Jesus predicting his own death. Again, I believe that the Gospel of Mark in this moment takes a very stark turn. This is a pivotal moment in this story. Up to this point, Jesus has been moving very quickly. We've talked about that, how Mark uses the word immediately over and over again. Jesus is always on the move. Jesus has asserted his dominance over nature, right? By stilling the wind and the waves, by calming the sea. He's asserted his dominance over humans, over other people, over sicknesses, and over demons, right? Jesus has been very strong and powerful in Mark's gospel. What does Jesus declare about himself in predicting his own death? Is he going to be powerful in his moment of death? Is he going into it with strength, with resolve, ready to tackle the people that are going to be torturing him? No. What does he declare? That he's going to be rejected. That he's going to be beaten and tortured, killed. And that he's going into it willingly. You see, in this moment, Mark is declaring that the one who has been in control the whole time in his gospel, that person will be controlled. The one with power in this gospel is going to be overpowered. His suffering is now becoming central to the gospel story and to what it looks like to be a kingdom person. You see, I think often we gravitate toward the passages that show Jesus' dominance and strength. We like those. We like Jesus in charge. Again, the Superman sort of Jesus. We like that Jesus. Especially as men, I think we often point to those stories. Neil talked about being a manly man last week a little bit with regard to his dad. And that got me thinking about this story this week as I was studying it. When we talk about being manly men, we talk about strength, resolve, right? Controlling other people around you, dominating them so that you can be on top, so that you can be number one. That's the way we often talk about men. And so we look at stories of Jesus like that and we go, I want to be like that. That's the guy I want to be like, strong and powerful and in charge and control. Jesus was a manly man, and I should be that too. There's some of that Jesus does, for sure. But when we only look at that, I think we fail to see the remainder of the story that Mark's giving us. Because you see, Jesus is also betrayed. Does he fight Judas whenever Judas comes to betray him? Does he sock Judas in the mouth as soon as he kisses him with those lips? I mean, that's what we expect from a manly man, right? Somebody betrays you, you hit him. You take him down. You don't turn on me like that. What does he do? He accepts the kiss, and then those who come to take him away. He's punished and pushed aside, and then he fights back, right? Of course not. He's mocked and he's ridiculed. So what does he do? He stands before them and he mocks them back, doesn't he? That's what a real man does. A real man stands behind a podium and mocks other people and makes fun of them, right? Right? We see people do that all the time, don't we? We have politicians mocking people left and right. That's what we're supposed to do, aren't we? We stand behind a podium with strength and power and say, is that what Jesus does? Is that the picture of that Mark gives us of Jesus? He's beaten. He suffers before going to the cross. And he does every bit of it without complaining. I dare you to read all 4 of the Gospels and find a moment that Jesus complains through all of this. He doesn't feel weak or emasculated because this happens to him. In fact, he shows his strength because of how he handles it. He does it all as a demonstration to me. That's what a real manly man looks like. That's how a real man handles situations. We have this moment in verse 31 where Mark tells us that Jesus began to tell them something new, indicating that he wasn't saying these sort of things before. So what does he say? What is he teaching them now? And why now? What's changed? Why is Jesus teaching them something new all of a sudden? The only real change that appears to have happened is that the disciples, Peter, has now declared that Jesus is Messiah. And so because of that truth, whether, again, they fully understand what it means to be Messiah or not, and I still think that they don't quite understand it all, now he can begin to teach them more about what Messiah really is. You see, the confession that Peter makes is the launching point for going even deeper into this mystery of Jesus. It's the launching point of showing what his kingdom is really going to look like. It isn't the answer, right? Just like in math, you learn to add 2 plus 2. The answer is 4. But that's not the final answer of math, is it? There's still more to do. That was just a prerequisite for moving on to higher forms of math. Peter's declaration that Jesus is Messiah isn't the answer to end all answers in this moment. It's merely the answer to move on to the next stage of learning for the disciples and for us as well. That's why a person's spiritual life with God doesn't end because they confess Jesus and get baptized. I mean, if that were the case, what are the majority of us doing here? If you believe that your spiritual life with God ended just because you said, I believe in Jesus, and you got dunked in water, you shouldn't be here. Oh, of course, that's merely the beginning of the next phase of what it means to be a spiritual person. And so Peter's declaration here isn't the answer to end all answers. It's the answer to begin the next stage of spiritual life. And the truth is, that's no more seen than in the very next moment that we have in the story, because what happens immediately after this? Peter says something that Jesus doesn't like. He reprimands Jesus. What does Jesus say? Oh, Peter, you're not speaking by yourself right now. The words you're speaking are demonic. He says that they are of Satan. Surely Peter's confession wasn't the end of his spiritual journey, because he messes up immediately after. If you mess up from time to time, welcome to being a disciple of Jesus. The last thing I want to talk about is the Transfiguration. Again, we're talking this morning about the Messiah being revealed. And that no more happens, I think, than in this beautiful, weird sort of story about Jesus being transfigured. I thought about, anybody remember the first time you got to look through a microscope or a telescope? The wonder, the beauty that opened up before you. Right? You take the smallest little thing, and you can only see just very minute details with the naked eye. But you put it into a microscope, and what opens up? A whole new world before you that you never knew existed. Right? There are little microbes and all these tiny things that you can't see with your eyes, unless you have the right instrument, the right tool to do that. Look up at the stars at night. They're beautiful, aren't they? You can see Mars going by from time to time in our horizon. But get a telescope out. Look at Mars. Look at the moon. Look at the stars through an instrument that reveals to you, that shows you even more. To me, like a child peering through a microscope or a telescope for the first time, they marvel at this beauty, this wonder that opens up before them. Here, Peter, James, and John, it's like they're looking through a microscope or a telescope at Jesus. They've seen Jesus, right? They've seen him. But now, what do they really get to do? They really get to see him here in this moment. And we have this really comical sort of thing where Peter blurts out, right? Jesus, let's build 3 shelters. Why does he do that? I mean, part of it could just be because Peter's Peter, right? Peter talks a lot. Peter's always the guy with the answer. You've known people like that. A question gets answered. There's always that one person who's got an answer, whether it's right or wrong. They want to be the first person to speak. You've known people like that. Peter looks like that kind of person. But then as I thought about it this week, I began to think, I don't know. I think what he's doing is really practical. Imagine you're in this moment instead of Peter. Wouldn't you want it to continue for as long as possible? Wouldn't you want to stay in that moment with Jesus and Moses and Elijah? I would. Well, what's the natural thing to do? Well, if we're going to stay up here, we need shelters, right? We need to be able to sleep at night. We got to... Jesus, let's make shelters. I really think there's a practical element here of what Peter's asking. Yeah, he puts his foot in his mouth. He does that a lot. But at the same time, I can't blame him. I would want that moment to last for as long as possible. I think Peter's response is precisely the sort of response that most of us would have as well. So in this moment, the disciples, at least these 3, they have their eyes fully open. God is letting them see how he sees Jesus. And so what does this moment signify? Why Moses and Elijah? What is it with these 2 guys? Well, if you've read Scripture, you know Moses, you know Elijah, you know the great place that they have in the story of Israel. So Jesus, the significance here is that Jesus has taken up the responsibility of being a prophet to the people. That doesn't mean he's some kind of fortune teller or palm reader, right? He's not somebody you go to and your tarot cards thrown out before you and know your future. It's not who Jesus is. So what is he? What is a prophet? He's a dispenser of God's wisdom and knowledge for the world. So this moment, Jesus takes up that mantle. He is going to be the prophet for the people that they need. But then the voice of God confirms something even deeper than just that he's a prophet. Who is he? So we've just asked this question, or rather Jesus just asked this question of Peter. Who do you say I am? And Peter says, you're the Messiah. I get it now, don't I? Jesus, you're the Messiah. And what does God's voice come along and proclaim? This is my son. He's not just a Messiah. He's not just a prophet. He is the Son of the living God. Only one person can carry that title. It's not Moses. It's not Elijah. It's this guy who stands greater and taller than either of them ever could. And the last little thing from this story that just stuck out to me. Did you see how God ended his statement to the disciples? What did he say to them? listen to him. Listen to him. Now, I know a thing or two about people not listening. I preach every Sunday. And I have 3 children. I was going to go with the children line, and then as I stood there, I thought, I'm going to go with the preaching line. It just came to me. I use my children a lot as the butt of my jokes. I thought I'd make you the butt of my jokes. We know what it's like to have people not listen to us, don't we? Some of you are married. You know what it's like to have somebody not listen to you. Some of you have had children. You know what it's like to not have people not listen to you. You work in offices, and you know what it's like to have people not listen to you. And so I love this statement from God to the disciples. Listen to him. Now, listening isn't just hearing, right? Listening takes more. It takes more than just to hear. Hearing, it can go in one ear, straight out the other side. To listen means to absorb, to take in, to go deeper with that message. I hope that you've been reading along with us every week. My question to you this morning, have you been listening? Or have you just been, I know this story. I can read this really quick. Get through it today. I don't need to do anything more with that. Have you been listening to Jesus? That's what God instructs us to do. So as we close today, a couple of questions to leave with. The first one is, who do you say Jesus is? Is he just a great teacher to you? Is he like some superhero swooping in? Or is he something more? And then the follow-up to that is, when you confess who he is, how does that change you? It's not just enough to confess. It has to do something to you. You have to change because of that. Your life has to look different and be different. You have to act differently because of that confession. Anybody can stand up and declare Jesus is Lord. In fact, Jesus tells us a lot of people have done that they've called on me, Lord, Lord. And then what is he going to say? I'm sorry, I don't know you. Confession can't lead to nothing. It has to lead to a changed life. So how does confessing who Jesus is change you each and every day? Then the last one is, are you listening to the voice of Jesus in your life? You got a lot of things vying for your attention. You got a lot of people telling you what to do, what not to do, the right clothes to wear, how to look, how to act, how to be in this world, the kind of music you should listen to, the kind of movies you should like, because, come on, don't you want to be liked by other people? There's only one real voice that you need to listen to. Amen. So are you listening to the voice of Jesus? It's good news in the Gospel of Mark, which, of course, you already knew, because the gospel means good news. As we continue on this journey, we're building to that time when Jesus is going to be tortured, beaten, and hurt, and mocked, and ridiculed. As we build toward that moment, I want you to continue to see the kind of kingdom that Jesus is building, the kind of person that he is. How does he live and act that changes who you are? Because again, it's not just enough to confess. You must change who you are. It's our family time. We're coming family time. That means if there's a need that you have, if there's a Thanksgiving that you want to let us know about, if there's something going on, that we need to surround you, pray for you, hug you, give you a holy kiss. Jim has volunteered to give holy kisses whenever you ask for it. Again, we don't do that enough. We don't do holy kisses enough. If there's something you need from this church, from this family, we want to be there for you. Let us know about whatever that is as we stand right now and sing.